Now, if I say to you Lyme disease, L-Y-M-E, Lyme disease, you may well think, well, that doesn't, thank goodness, apply to us here in London, does it really? Isn't it something that they get in the United States, not something that we have to concern ourselves with? Well, unfortunately, that isn't the case. Doctors have been given advice about diagnosing and treating Lyme disease. It's a devastating illness, and you get it from being bitten by a tick. Ticks are mainly found in grassy and wooded areas, particularly areas that are overgrown, and that can include gardens and parks. Public Health England says there's a higher risk of getting Lyme disease in the south than in other parts of the country, and it is thought that there are 2,000 to 3,000 new cases of it here every year. Lottie Khan says she got Lyme disease after being bitten in Golders Hill Park. Lottie, hello. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Vanessa.
So tell me where you were in Golders Hill Park and what you were doing there.
Well, I was just spending a day with my children and our friends. We were in Golders Hill Park, and there is a deer enclosure.
Yes.
Which
I know it well, yes.
Yes, and we were just having a picnic, and I was on a picnic rug, and whatnot, and that's where I most probably, obviously, you can never guarantee that I was bitten. I'm actually one of those people who never saw a tick, but what happens is, in many cases, not all cases, so I was wearing 3/4 length leggings, and he must have crawled all the way up, and it was the following week that I started to see this sort of funny sort of red, first like a red patch, and then like a red ring form around it, which looks like a bullseye.
Yes, they call it the bullseye rash, with a sort of red dot in the middle and then a sort of ring around it. I'm looking at pictures now. Yes, and you noticed this developing, and did you have any idea what it could possibly be?
No, and I wish I had. And this is what I always say, that, you know, if anybody gets what is called the EM rash, bullseye rash, they need to go to doctors straight away and get antibiotic treatment, because that is when you really hit it hard. If you don't, you end up like me. So I had that rash. I didn't think much about it. Only thing I knew that I had to wear dark tights or very thick tights for work, so that I wasn't showing it, because it was on a kind of visible spot. And then, without realizing, I started to get a whole host of other symptoms, which I did not link to the bite until 2.5, 3 months later.
What sort of symptoms did you get, Lottie?
Well, firstly, it just started sort of like general feeling of being unwell.
Yeah.
And then I started to get fatigued. But first, they actually thought I then had labyrinthitis, because I started to get dizziness. And at work, for example, I was unable to wear high heels, which I was joking about, but I just wasn't able to wear them because I was having vertigo and whatnot. And it sort of happened gradually. Having said that, in my case, it did come on quite quickly, because by the, I was bitten in early May, and by the mid-July, I had totally crashed. I had stroke-like symptoms. They thought I had MS, and so I've.
And just tell us how old you are, if you wouldn't mind.
I'm 39.
Right, and how fit or healthy you were before this?
Well, this is something what's happening with me at the moment, because I'm still unable to work. So we are looking at a year later. Yeah. And I'm in this stage that if I look back how I was, because I was energetic, I was very fit, I've exercised all my life, and I had a really actually happy life.
Yes.
So if I look back to that, it can be quite depressing, because it has totally changed my life.
I'm so sorry, honestly, how awful. You're sounding so incredibly brave, and from the sort of tone of your voice, you would think it was a mere nothing, but it's obviously completely felled you and flattened you as a person and robbed you of your health. So how did you get it diagnosed? Because as I said when I introduced this item, I don't think most of us think Lyme disease is a kind of London thing that we even have to think about.
Yes, well, I think I was quite lucky, because unfortunately it appears, and I'm not even an expert, that there are still lots of medical professionals who don't always think about Lyme disease early on. So there are people who go undiagnosed for years and years. They get diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and some people with MS and whatnot. But I was lucky, because my neurologist, after my emergency brain scans came sort of pretty much clear, then he asked million-dollar question: do you think you may have been bitten?
Yes.
And then I could go back to him, yes. And because I had also developed 2 other of these rashes, which can happen in Lyme, as soon as he saw those, he says, I am pretty sure. So even before the test came back and whatever, he was like, I'm pretty sure it's Lyme.
And by the time you saw him all those months later, did you still have that rash, that pimple rash?
The original one, not so much. But when the treatment was started, interestingly, it sort of came back. Almost, it was slightly faint. But the other EM rash, which I had on my chest, it stayed for about another 3 months.
Gosh.
So they can stay on.
And how are you doing now, Lottie, before I say bye-bye?
Yeah, well, I'm doing better. And this is what I was saying earlier, that if I look my life back, before I was sick, it would be quite depressing. But if I look my life back a year ago, I'm so much better.
Oh, good.
But I'm still, I'm as I say, I am not living the way I used to, but I'm trying to be positive and just see that I am better. But the problem is you can never know whether I'm ever going to be cured or, what my future holds.
Lottie, thank you. And listen, I wish you well. I think you've been incredibly courageous in describing it so well for us. Thank you very much. Let me go straight to Sandra Pearson, Medical Director of the charity Lyme Disease Action. Sandra, hello.
Hello, Vanessa.
Presumably Lottie's story is one that you're very familiar with and hear a lot.
Yes, yeah. Again, very good of Lottie to speak up and
very much so.
Yeah.
But her symptoms, when she says, she can't work, she's exhausted. Tell us the other symptoms of Lyme disease. What happens to people who contract it?
Well, the early symptoms, the bullseye rash, the erythema migrans rash can appear like 3 to 30 days after a tick bite, but not everybody gets that. So Lottie's diagnosis would have been much harder if she didn't remember the tick bite and if she hadn't had the rash. And so people can get flu-like symptoms, so headache, fatigue, fever, aches and pains, flu-like in summertime. That might sort of raise awareness. But then if the bacteria, and it's caused by a bacteria, spreads from the skin into the system, as Lottie says, you can get neurological problems, joint problems, more rarely kind of heart problems, or again, rashes on the skin.
And what's the story with a cure or treatment?
Well, treat early, raising awareness, which you're doing, and for London, because London last year had the 3rd highest incidence in the whole country.
Blimey.
So just behind the southeast and the southwest.
Yep.
People tend to think it's out there in the countryside, but work's actually been done, in the Royal Parks, places like Richmond Park, where they found about 2% of ticks infected when you look. So the story about treatment is treat early. If you treat early, like in the first few weeks and months, then there's a much better chance of people being cured.
And what is the treatment?
Antibiotics. But if it gets into the system, then the whole issue of diagnosis.
And are there tests? Can you do a blood test? Is there a test you can do that says, yes, Lyme disease, or is it always a matter of conjecture?
Well, in the early stages, when the rash is there, the blood tests aren't that sensitive. They rely on antibodies developing, so it's an indirect test.
Yeah.
There's no test of cure, there's no test of disease activity.
Yeah.
And the tests, the antibody tests, serology tests, they had some limitations, but I don't think we're really recognising that at the moment. They seem to be being used as if they're reliable and accurate. And, there is evidence, scientific evidence from the European Centre for Disease Control published last year that shows that there are limitations. And so it's important to be aware of that. A lot of work's being done, research into developing better tests that...
All right, let me ask you this. It's a lovely day in London.
Yeah.
What could be finer than to go off to Golders Hill Park with your friends and family, wearing flip-flops and shorts or, short summer dress or whatever it is, and sit on a blanket on the ground next to the deer enclosure and think, isn't this lovely? Here we are. We could be in the deepest countryside, but actually we're in NW11. I've done it a million times. What could be nicer than walking on Hampstead Heath, in Richmond Park, in Epping Forest, in your own back garden, in your flip-flops or bare feet, thinking, well, this is lovely. This is what we wait all year for, a summer day like this that we can enjoy. Are you going to tell us, Sandra, that we shouldn't be doing it here in London?
Absolutely not.
No, you're not?
No, green spaces be tick aware that if you go away from, in Richmond Park, they found that most of the ticks were in the longer grass, in the wooded areas. So it's about, the risk isn't huge, but it's there, and it's about making people aware, not scaring them off.
Would you go wandering about in bare feet in long grass? No, would you really?
Not. No, I probably wouldn't.
You wouldn't.
No.
What would you, wearing your Wellington boots even in the height of summer? Seriously? I'm not joking, I'm serious.
I think I probably would think twice about going in the long grass, and I'd check myself afterwards. I mean, I do this if I've been in areas like Dartmoor, then I'll just check myself, the back of the legs, around my ankles, because ticks tend to crawl off.
What does a tick look like?
Very, very tiny. The ticks that bite humans, the nymphs, are the size of a poppy seed when they're unfed.
And do they look like a poppy seed, little black things?
They look like tiny spiders. So they don't fly, they don't jump, they're crawling arthropods. They're related to spiders.
I don't care about their relations. We just don't want them anywhere near us. Sandra, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to Lottie Carswell. Lyme disease, you can catch it here in London. Something else to worry about. God, I'm giving you a headache this morning. I don't mean to. I only send love and affection. Not my fault. I wish I could choose the stories and they could all be delightful. I'm afraid we can't manage that in the breakfast show here at Radio London. Goodness gracious. Lyme disease, something else to concern ourselves with. We'll be straight back with you after the travel.